Welcome to the recorded version of Understanding the Scams Seniors Face, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
All right, our presenter today is going to be LAKELYN HOGAN. LAKELYN is the Strategic Partnership Representative for Home Instead Senior Care. She holds a graduate certificate in gerontology and is currently working towards a Master's of Arts in Social Gerontology. She also holds a Master's in Business Administration, and her undergraduate education focused on marketing and communication studies. LAKELYN has professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. She has worked on special projects for the University of Nebraska-Omaha's Department of Gerontology and the local area agency on aging. She is serving in her second year as the co-chair of the Nebraska State Chapter of the Alzheimer's Association's Dementia Care Conference. LAKELYN has spent several years assisting senior clients and helping their families navigate the senior care continuum. She is passionate about helping others, especially aging adults and their families. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenter today, LAKELYN HOGAN. Thank you for being here, LAKELYN.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And we're talking about a topic that can be very difficult because we're talking about the vulnerability of seniors that we all serve. And I'm sure you've heard stories in the news about the devastating effects of scams that are affecting seniors, but the good news is that we can help as professionals. So again, I'm so thankful you're on today's webinar because that tells me that you know the importance of this topic, and I hope that you'll walk away with some useful tips and information to share with the families and the seniors that you work with. And as I mentioned, you probably heard stories in the media about people who are scamming seniors, or you might have had a personal experience with someone you know that got scammed, or maybe someone even in your own family. And according to a MetLife study, it's estimated that between 20 and 37% of older adults face financial exploitation. And when I heard that statistic, I thought that was quite a big range. But I learned it's difficult to measure financial exploitation and senior scams because people are often embarrassed to admit that they've been taken advantage of, especially if it's someone in their own family or someone that they know. It can be very embarrassing. And a study released last month by the Elder Investment Fraud and Financial Exploitation Prevention Program, 74% of children think that their adult parent would tell them immediately if they had been swindled or fallen victim to a scam, compared to 21% who think their parents would be ashamed to hide the fact that they were scammed. So we see that even the adult children are recognizing that their senior loved one might be afraid or ashamed to tell them that they had fallen victim to a scam. So you can see why it's very difficult to measure. And a recent American Society on Aging article that was in their monthly newspaper called Aging Today highlighted some research done by a company called TrueLink. And their data shows that over $17 billion is lost to financial exploitation. And this company defines financial exploitation as misleading or confusing language, often combined with social pressure and tactics targeted at people with cognitive decline. And they also estimate that $13 billion is lost to criminal activity, such as scams, fake lottery winners, identity theft, and then $7 billion is lost in deceit or theft by a trusting relationship, so a family member or friend. And these numbers go to show that this is not a minor issue by any means. The numbers are actually very staggering. But like I mentioned earlier, I hope that by listening to today's webinar, you'll be able to come away with some helpful tips to prevent senior scams from happening to the seniors that you work with and even maybe people in your own family. And my goal today is to empower you with the signs of senior scamming and empower you with ways to react and educate those that you work with. So let's look at the objectives on the next slide. By the end of today, my hope is that you will be able to identify the types of scams, frauds, and abuse that are out there, and also be able to recognize the signs of abuse and learn prevention strategies to protect the seniors that you work with. And then, as always, I'm going to share some very helpful resources at the end of today's webinar that I think that you will enjoy. So let's start with why seniors are targets of scams on the next slide. There are a number of national organizations and law enforcement agencies that have identified some common themes that increase a senior's risk of being victimized. And you can see it's kind of a long list here on this slide, but the first is availability. Seniors are seen as a target because they're home more frequently. In many cases, they are retired or less mobile, so scan artists can troll for victims by either calling or dropping by the home. Another factor is isolation. Some seniors are far away from loved ones, and in some cases they might have little or no interaction with relatives or friends, and therefore they're isolated in their homes, which leads to the next factor of loneliness. So that sense of isolation can lead to loneliness, and seniors' friendships are often limited, so this can make them vulnerable to a friendly scammer who calls or drops by the house. And some scammers might even be trusted people who build a relationship with an older adult and then prey on their vulnerabilities. And one example of this that came to mind that's becoming more popular is online dating. I'm sure you have seen advertisements on television for senior dating websites. And, you know, I've heard of several unfortunate stories where people have developed online relationships and ended up being scammed. In fact, someone I know's relative met a younger gentleman, a female senior, met a younger gentleman, and after they developed a relationship via email and telephone, he told her that one of his loved ones got into a bad accident. And he created this whole life or death sob story and told her that he needed money for the medical bills. And since she had invested in this relationship, developed feelings for this younger man, she sent him $10,000. And then once he received the money, he cut off all communications, and she never heard from him again. So, of course, this is a very sad situation, but it's factors like loneliness that can cause a senior to become vulnerable, especially when it comes to these types of dating sites. So, something to keep your eye out for. And then also bereavement. This is one I'd not really thought of before, but I recently attended a presentation given by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and they had given a really informative presentation, and one of their investigations led them to a scammer who had stacks upon stacks of obituaries from around the country in his living room. And he was calling people and scamming them by using all the information that you can find in an obituary. And when you think about it, there are names of relatives, there are ages of the individual that passed. So there's a lot of information out there that can make a senior vulnerable. So, and when you're grieving, sometimes a friendly phone call or someone reaching out to you can be comforting. So we need to be careful that they're not deceived in that process, that bereavement process. And then sickness. Many chronic health issues are affecting older adults, and that causes them difficulties in maintaining their property. So the outside of their homes might look a little overgrown or unkept. So scam artists really watch out for these types of things, and they might, come by the house and offer to mow the lawn or fix and repair the home, and they could end up milking the senior for hundreds of dollars for these costs or for these fixes that might be, a pretty minor cost to your average person. And another big one is cognitive impairment, and I already mentioned that earlier, but dementia and Alzheimer's disease can make this senior scam issue even worse. And the person with cognitive impairment is likely to have impaired judgment and may fall easily for scams. And at the ASA conference that I attended last month in Washington, D.C., I attended a session that addressed this issue. And I learned that the damage to the frontal temporal lobe of your brain, so if you put your finger between your eyes, that part of your brain, if that's damaged or if there's injury to that part of the brain, it can impair a person's judgment. So this doesn't just apply to seniors. It could be people who have had multiple concussions or brain injury. They can have that impaired judgment, and they might be likely to fall victim to these types of scams. So we have to be aware of that. And another factor is prosperity. Seniors have quite a bit of money. They've been saving their whole lives, and so that is a definite vulnerability in the eyes of a scammer. They see a supply of wealth that includes homes and property, life savings, and other assets, And they also know that they have excellent credit and they can easily get approved for financing. So they're definitely a target for identity theft. And when I was researching on this, what came to mind was those city identity theft commercials from a few years back. And I looked one up, and there was a commercial where these two older ladies are sitting and drinking tea, but they're talking in male voices, the men that have stolen their identity, and they're talking about the motorcycles they bought and the unlimited amount of cash they're spending at the expense of these ladies who don't even know that their identities are being compromised. So while these commercials were entertaining and kind of funny, they really do bring attention to a very serious matter, and that is the scams that seniors are facing out there. And the last couple, polite and trusting seniors, are very common. Many seniors don't want to be rude, and they want to keep their composure when they're talking to visitors or callers on the phone. Pardon me. And they have a hard time being confident and dismissing things when they're uncomfortable. And one of my clients' sons kept telling his mom, "Mom, just hang up on these telemarketers." And she would always say, "No, I can't do that. That's not polite to hang up on people." So that could be a factor that could make them a little more vulnerable. And finally, they're less likely to report. As I've touched on briefly earlier, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, says that older Americans are less likely to report fraud because they don't know who to report it to. They're too ashamed to report it, and sometimes they don't even know they've been scammed. So another reason for concern for families to watch out for. So it's important for all of us to understand why seniors are a target so we can better equip them and help them in these situations. So I've referenced this METLIFE study, and I want to give you a little more detail here on this next slide. So in 2011, the METLIFE released a study on elder financial abuse, and this photo here is a copy of the PDF that you can download on their website. And they did this study in collaboration with the National Committee for Prevention of Elder Abuse and the Center for Gerontology at Virginia Tech. And while this study is a couple years old, I still felt that it was very relevant and had a lot of great useful information. And the study talks about 3 types of scams and abuse, and I want to go over that here on this next slide. So the first type of fraud and abuse is crimes of occasion or opportunity. And these are incidents of financial abuse that occur because the victim is in the way of what the perpetrator wants, and that's usually money or assets. And the next is crimes of desperation, which are typically those in which a family member or a friend becomes so desperate for money that they'll do whatever it takes to get it. And finally, crimes of predation occur when trust is developed for a specific purpose of financial abuse. And I want to dive deeper into each of these. So let's start with crimes of occasion on the next slide. Crimes of occasion or opportunity occur when the older person has money or assets and an occasion presents itself for the person to steal from the senior. And the METLIFE study gives an example of a Manhattan businessman that was charged with grand larceny, forgery, and other charges after stealing more than $330,000 from a 90-year-old semi-retired lawyer. So this perpetrator had invited the victim, let's call him Steve, to use his office space. He was 98 years old and still working as a lawyer. So when they were sharing this office space, and when this elderly gentleman, Steve, broke his hip, the abuse started to happen. The perpetrator had access to all of Steve's financial information, and his absence from work provided the perfect opportunity for the perpetrator to dig in and help himself to Steve's assets. And I'm sure there are hundreds of stories out there like this, but to sum it up, if the opportunity presents itself, the perpetrator is going to take advantage of the senior. And I want to look at some more examples of crimes of occasion on the next slide. And the first one is identity theft. When a senior gets a call or a letter or maybe an email asking for account verification information, including the account number, social security number, then the scammers are most likely going to use this type of information to open credit cards, loans, lines of credit in order to purchase goods and services that are billed to the senior. And being tax season, we're in the month of April, it's tax time, I've heard that there are multiple scammers out there calling seniors saying that they're the IRS and asking for personal information and threatening that the IRS will put them in jail or fine them if they don't pay X amount of money. So people might know that the IRS is never going to call you and ask for that type of information. So it's just a good rule of thumb to tell the seniors that you work with, and even ourselves, that we should never give our personal credit card information or Social Security information to someone that calls us. That's usually a sign of a scam. Healthcare or health insurance fraud is another crime of occasion. These schemes tend to focus on offers for free and sometimes unnecessary medical equipment or testing that the senior or the health insurers are charged for but then never are delivered upon. And for some seniors, Medicare fraud is especially prevalent. And it's estimated that $60 billion is lost annually in Medicare fraud, according to Senior Medicare Patrol. So scams such as fraudulent discount plans or cards for Medicare, prescription drug fraud, Medicare identity theft are just a few examples of frauds that involve Medicare. And Senior Medicare Patrol is a great resource, and I'm going to mention them again later on the resource slide. But if you're working a lot with Medicare, they have a great website where you can go to look up specific information on Medicare fraud. And then another scam of occasion is being offered or sold counterfeit prescription drugs. Oftentimes, scammers will offer discount cards that are under a fake company or organization. And a couple of years ago in California, 1,600 fake pharmacies were shut down for selling counterfeit prescription drugs. That's a staggering amount, so it's definitely an issue out there. And then internet fraud. This usually occurs when non-delivery of items that are ordered online, they never arrive at the person's house. They might fall victim to credit or debit card scams. And a coworker of mine, she actually went online recently to get her iPad fixed. She wanted some tech support from Apple, and so she found this website as one of the first ones that popped up, and she called the number and started talking to them and slowly started to realize this wasn't Apple at all, because they were telling her she needed to give them credit card information and they were going to charge her hundreds of dollars to fix this iPad. And so she hung up and took it to the Apple store, and they fixed it for free. So even, these internet scams, they might have a facade of a legitimate company. So we really just have to be aware, have a heightened awareness of these types of frauds that could take place. And for seniors, funeral and cemetery fraud is definitely prevalent. And this is where funds are taken in advance for services by funeral homes or cemeteries that might not even exist. And then because our society is so heavily focused on preserving our youth, we're seeing a lot of commercials out there for anti-aging products and offers on how to keep your youth. And oftentimes these can be fraudulent and they might not do anything at all. So we need to be very wary of those types of scams. And the next one is something we're all very familiar with. I'm sure we get calls almost on a daily basis, and that's telemarketing fraud. And this type of crime of occasion especially targets older women that are living alone. And in general, these telephone scams involve offers for free prizes or sweepstakes, low-cost vitamins or healthcare products, and inexpensive vacations that require an immediate response or some form of prepayment or shipping and handling cost. So an example of a telemarketing scam in the news recently was fake companies that were selling medical alert or instant response systems, like a Lifeline type deal. And one company was even telling seniors that they had received a call from a loved one, and they wanted that loved one wanted this company to call the senior and tell them that they need to buy the product. So these products range from $800 to $1,700 for this around-the-clock service that was going to keep them safe and secure. And the company said, just to get started, we're going to mail you an envelope. It's pre-stamped. You just put the check in and send it back to us. Well, I'm sure you all know what the end of the story, that medical alarm, that device never came, that support was never there for them. So we really need to do our research and make sure that these companies are legitimate. Another form of telemarketing fraud can also include requests for donations for fake charities. I had a client who was a complete animal lover, and she had beginning stages of dementia, and she was getting all sorts of calls from animal shelters, letters asking for donations from both legitimate and fake organizations, and she would just write a check or give them her credit card information over the phone without thinking twice about it because she just loved animals so much and wanted to help these animals. And the son looked into her bank statements and noticed that thousands of dollars each month were going to these charities. So we devised a plan where we went to the local Humane Society and had her give a regular monthly donation, and they gave her a cute little picture of an animal that she was supporting. And every time she wanted to give to an organization, we would remind her, you already give to the Humane Society here locally, so maybe let's throw this one away. So again, we have to be wary of these and kind of come up with some creative solutions on how to keep seniors safe from these types of scams and frauds. And then the final scam of occasion is financial exploitation, which includes investment schemes such as advanced fees or prime bank notes, as well as pyramid and letter fraud schemes. And they can also include reverse mortgage scams, where seniors are offered free homes or investment opportunities, and foreclosure or refinance assistance. So a lot of these scams can happen to anyone, but the people who are doing these types of preying they're usually preying on seniors. So the next type of crime is crimes of desperation. We're going to look at that on the next slide. According to the METLIFE study, crimes of desperation are typically those in which a family member or friend becomes so desperate for money that they'll do whatever it takes. And often these desperate family members are dependent on the elder parent for housing or money. They might also have a drug or alcohol dependency that can become a factor in these crimes. And the METLIFE story told a heart-wrenching the METLIFE study told a heart-wrenching story about this husband and wife. I'll call them Susan and Tom. Tom called Susan's elderly mother and said he was holding Susan for ransom, and if she did not meet up with him and pay him $500, he would kill Susan. And of course, the mom became very upset and met Tom at a gas station to give him this money. And unbeknownst to her, Susan was waiting in a getaway car, and the two of them used the money to purchase drugs. So this is a very sad story when family members get so desperate they scam their own loved ones. And it might not even be family. It could be people you know, people that you're allowing into your house. Another example is a drug addict in Maine who was cleaning homes for seniors, and she was stealing their prescription drugs not only for her own use, but she was selling those. So again, an example of crimes of desperation. And in other cases, it's more about a sense of entitlement. So an exploiting a family member or friend comes to believe that they deserve money or possessions because they're providing care for the older person, and regardless of how little care that actually might be. And this can become a repeated pattern of theft. I encountered a situation similar to this when working with a family. The granddaughter and her family, husband and 3 kids, lived with Grandpa and was quote-unquote caring for him, and they were using his Social Security money for their own personal use, and they were failing to provide adequate care for him. And they wouldn't let other family members in to visit Grandpa because she thought, if Grandpa has to move, if they see the condition he's really in, then I'm not going to have a place to live anymore, and I'm not going to have his money to live off of. So she felt she deserved that because she was taking care of him. So it can happen in our own families. It can happen by people we know. So, in desperate times, people will do things, and seniors can be a victim of those crimes. And then finally, on the next slide, the last crime category is crimes of predation. And these occur when the predator takes steps to gain the victim's trust in order to steal from them. And sometimes trust is built through a romantic relationship. Sometimes they're occupying a role of trust, such as a gold digger falling in love with an older person to get a hold of their assets. or even your local handyman who comes in and fixes things for you. An example of this is a 38-year-old man in Florida. He preyed on a neighborhood specifically designed for seniors, and he passed out flyers with his handyman services, and a woman hired him to paint her house and repair damages inside and out. And over time, the two became very close, almost like a mother-son relationship. And a concerned neighbor called the authorities because she was worried. And after an investigation, they discovered through bank statements that not only did he overcharge her for his services, he was also charging skydiving, hotel, bar tabs, all to her account. And in the end, he stole $50,000 for her. And that's just one woman. This man is facing 400 counts of financial fraud. So I know these examples can sometimes be very extreme, but they do happen. And I'll just give one more example of this type of situation that involved a court-appointed guardian. Some people don't have anyone to look out for them, so the court will appoint a specific guardian. And this elderly woman's name was Marie, and she was quickly milked of all her money by this guardian, who said that not only will she be a guardian to her, she'll also provide all the care that she needs. And she was charging her $15,000 a month for her care services. And once she drained Marie of all of her money, she withdrew her guardianship, and Marie was left with virtually nothing. And these stories seem almost unbelievable and really sad to hear, but we're going to hopefully give you some tools and tips on how you can have a heightened awareness to this, so we can hopefully help educate the seniors that we're working with so they do not fall victim to these crimes. So let's look at the impacts that these types of crimes have on the next slide. That same MetLife study had researchers that calculated the annual dollar amount lost by victims of elderly financial abuse in 2010 was $2.9 billion, which was a 12% increase from 2008. So the victims of fraud, the numbers in dollars is increasing, unfortunately. But when people are deprived of their assets, just as Marie, the story I just told you, she lost all of her money. She now depends on government assistance. So there's obviously another set of costs, and that's to us as a taxpayer. So these people who have been saving all of their lives, their finances are getting drained, and they're having to turn to government assistance to take care of them. So and we heard in the opening, I mentioned that the TrueLink company estimated $30 billion when you take into account all the different types of scams out there. So it's really all how you it depends on how you look at it. You can't really put one dollar amount because there's different types of fraud and abuse going on. And like I have mentioned several times, people don't always report when they've been scammed, so it's difficult to put a number to it. And there's more than just the financial cost. There's also an emotional toll. So let's take a look at that closer on the next slide. We talked a lot about the financial loss of abuse, but equally important, this abuse has impacts and costs that are not associated with a dollar sign. There's also a number of emotional impacts, including the loss of trust, greater fear and suspicion, and people are less willing to act generously when they've been affected by these types of scams. And the impacts are very real in terms of victims' well-being and peace of mind. And, of course, this can spill over into society as a whole. I feel like we've become a more skeptical society, and we seem to think twice before trusting a product or company or even an individual. We really like to do our research. So this is really affecting everyone, not just seniors. And let's take a look on the next slide at the profile of these perpetrators. So the MetLife study pointed out that nearly 60% of perpetrators were males, and their typical age range was 30 to 59 years old, and female perpetrators were anywhere from 30 to 49-year-olds. And about 51% of perpetrators were strangers and often targeted victims with visible vulnerabilities, such as limited mobility, displays of confusion, living alone. And reports of elder financial abuse by a family member, friend, or neighbor was 34%. And the MetLife study, it does say that they found that more friends and family were perpetrators than strangers. However, it doesn't always get reported because the family is concerned with the shame and a fear of retaliation or fear of further harm if they expose their loved one that's exploiting them. So while the stats say that strangers are more commonly the perpetrator, we still need to keep an eye on family members, friends, and our acquaintances. In other reports, they say that exploitation occurs about 12% in the business sector and about 6% in Medicare, Medicaid fraud. So there's lots of different aspects to senior fraud. But let's look a little bit closer at the victims, the people that are most likely to fall victim to these crimes on the next slide. And this MetLife study found that women are twice as likely to be victims of elder financial abuse as men. And most of these women were between the ages of 80 and 90 years old. They lived alone and required some level of help, whether that was home health care or home maintenance. And in almost all cases, the perpetrator recognized a combination of valued independence and observed vulnerability. And they perceived those two things in combination to be a prime opportunity for abuse. So now that we have a good idea of the demographics of both the perpetrator and the victims, let's take a look at the signs of abuse on the next slide. So how can we tell if a senior is falling victim to any of these crimes? Well, according to the National Committee for Prevention of Elder Abuse, you should look for several indicators that someone is being abused, and that includes unpaid bills, eviction notices, or notices to discontinue utilities. So this could be a red flag that money is gone. If you're getting these types of notices, you want to be checking the bank accounts. And we also, on those accounts, need to be looking out for unusual activities, such as large withdrawals, frequent transfers, or ATM withdrawals. We need to watch these bank statements closely. And for all of us, even family members, it's easy to glance over a common statement that we've been getting year after year, but we do need to keep an eye on it. And if those statements go missing, if somebody's been getting their bank statement mailed to their home for years and suddenly it's missing, don't assume that they are now on the electronic statements. A lot of banks now have you opt for that. Make sure you contact the bank and see what's going on, especially if you have other suspicions of fraud and abuse. And then also be leery of any new best friends or people that have suddenly come into their life and are being overly friendly. Make sure that family members are aware of who all is in their loved one's social circles, especially frequent visitors or callers. Another thing to keep your eye out for is new legal documents or financial arrangements that the senior is unaware of. This is a definite red flag for them to watch out for. So they should be keeping an eye on the mail for new legal documents, and this is especially concerning if someone has cognitive impairment. They can be easily persuaded to sign a legal document of which they can't comprehend. Another sign of abuse might be belongings or property that's missing. And it's important to have a good record of valuables and properties and make sure that the family's documenting key information and having those records. And also, suspicious signatures on checks or unfamiliar handwriting can be a sign that fraud is happening. So again, remind families to pay attention to bank statements. And I know at least my bank, I can go online and actually see a picture of the checks that are cashed. So that might be a good resource for families. They can get online and make sure that the handwriting on those checks is matching the seniors or the designated check writer in the family. It's also important for us as professionals to listen, especially to implausible explanations given about the senior's finances by him or her, a family member, caregiver, or friend. So if you're seeing several signs of this abuse, one sign might not indicate financial abuse, and more commonly, if there's a pattern, clusters of indicators, that that's when there's likely to be a problem. So we definitely need to keep our eyes out for these signs of abuse. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about tips for fraud prevention. According to the National Council on Aging, there are 8 steps that can help seniors avoid being scammed. So we can help pass this information along to the seniors we work with. So first, we need to help seniors understand that they need to be aware that there are risks for scams both by strangers as well as the ones that are closest to them. There's a fine line between scaring them and warning them, however. And this might be where we as professionals get pulled in. Families might be looking to us to have these conversations. And as a trusted professional, they assume that we come from a place of experience and knowledge. So it's good to have, these fraud prevention tips in our back pocket. And next, we need to encourage seniors to avoid being isolated. Encourage them to stay involved with their family, friends, religious organizations, favorite social activity groups. And I know when I worked as a care coordinator, I always encouraged families to check in with their loved ones and visit often in order to stay on top of things. And if seniors are still mobile and if they're able to get out and about, that puts them at less risk throughout the day of getting those phone calls or having a scammer show up at their front door. And then next, we need to suggest that seniors tell solicitors that they want everything in writing before responding to a telephone solicitation. Then, when or if, and that's a big if, the offer ever comes in the mail, then they have time to evaluate it and show it to their family members. The family can even call their local Better Business Bureau for more information to see if this is a legitimate solicitation. And then we also need to encourage seniors to shred all documents that have credit card information, Social Security information, or financial account numbers. A lot of communities have shredding days, and I know my local AARP in my community a couple times a year has a shredding event. And if you don't have that, you could always give the senior a shredder as a gift. It could be a great Christmas present. So if you haven't had a shredded event in your community, this might be a good opportunity for your organization to host one. And again, do your research on any type of scam that you encounter. If it seems too good to be true, a lot of times it is. So be sure to look into all unknown persons, businesses, or charities before exchanging any financials or giving any private information. On the next slide, we have a few more tips. We need to encourage seniors and their families to sign their loved ones up for the Do Not Call registry. And you can do that at donotcall.gov. And I would encourage doing this twice a year. And you could schedule it around key events like spring cleaning, New Year's Day, family get-togethers. That way, seniors are less likely to have telemarketers calling their homes. Another tip is to encourage seniors and their families to sign up for direct deposit for benefit checks to prevent them from being stolen from the mailbox. A lot of, in most all situations, those benefit checks can be directly deposited into their accounts, just like my paycheck is direct deposited into my account. And then we can also remind seniors to never give out their credit card, banking, Social Security, Medicare, or any other personal information over the phone unless they're the one that initiated the call. So if they're calling Social Security or they're calling Medicare, it's okay to give that information. But if anyone calls them claiming to be Medicare or Social Security or any other organization, seniors should never give out that information. We also need to be sure to tell seniors to be skeptical of unsolicited offers and to take time to be an informed consumer. Here's a tip for families. I know TV ads are mainly geared towards seniors during certain times of the day and on certain TV programs. So to avoid these types of solicitations, family members could DVR or TiVo their favorite shows and have them fast forward through the ads, or the family could themselves watch the ads and familiarize themselves with the types of ads that their loved one might be coming into contact with. And then it provides an opportunity to have a conversation, to ask the loved one, so I saw this reverse mortgage ad on TV the other day. What do you think about it? Just to kind of get a feel for the senior's understanding for the different scams that are out there. Another tip is to have a trusted advisor or two. We all need help. So encourage involvement, whether that's a financial advisor or a legal professional. Those are all good people to have as a resource for seniors. And the final point is to be proactive. Have the talk with your senior that you're working with. Encourage families to talk with their seniors in their lives. There's a great tool, the 40-70 rule, and this is a conversation guide to help those who are about the age of 40 talk to their adult parents who are about the age of 70 about important issues such as the scams that they might face. And as professionals, we need to encourage families to talk about matters before they become a problem. So you can find this guide at 4070talk.com, and I'll have that on the resource slide on the last page. So what if you are a suspect of abuse or fraud? Let's look at that on the next slide. Here are some key steps to follow if a senior has been scammed, according to the State Attorney General's Office and the Better Business Bureau. Contact the police. File a police report with your local police department. And if the theft did not take place in your area, if your loved one lives across the country, file the police report wherever that senior lives. And then also file a complaint to the FBI, and you can do that at fbi.gov. Also, close any accounts that are under the senior's name that have been tampered with or opened without consent, and encourage families to close them immediately and to call the bank or the company and have them follow up in writing. And if the fraudulent charges or debits on the account, or if the new account has been opened, immediately file a fraud report with the bank's fraud department. And if that bank has fraud protection alerts, that would be a really great way to be proactive in preventing fraud. And file a federal complaint. The Federal Trade Commission is a federal consumer protection agency, the FTC, in conjunction with the FBI. They maintain identity theft data clearinghouses, and the FTC aids in the identity theft investigations. So make sure if identity theft is part of this fraud that the senior is experiencing, that they contact the FTC. And then also you can contact your local Better Business Bureau to find a location and report the crime. And while they might not be able to recoup the money, they will definitely have tips and can offer support. And if you think that your senior loved one is falling victim of crime, you can check with the Better Business Bureau to see if that person, that business, is a legitimate organization. So now we know who to contact. Let's look at some resources here on this next slide. And I've talked a lot about this already, contacting the FBI, the FTC. The FTC actually has a great program called Pass It On, and I have the web address up there, ftc.gov/passiton. It's a great program on getting seniors to talk to each other about senior fraud and how they can be easily fall victim to it, so that's a great resource. There's also the National Committee for Prevention of Elder Abuse. The website's right there. Also the National Center on Elder Abuse, the National Adult Protective Services Association. So if you think that an individual is, their health and well-being, their safety is at risk, you definitely want to contact APS and get that senior in a safe environment. And that ASA session that I attended was put on by the Elder Investment Fraud and Financial Exploitation Prevention Program, EFI, and that's really geared towards professionals, investment bankers. So if you find yourself in a clinician role and want to learn more about the cognitive impairment and how that can impair judgment for these crimes, you can just Google EFI program, and then finally, ProtectSeniorsFromFraud.com is a great resource. Home Instead Senior Care has put together a fraud prevention kit, and it is completely free, and you can download it. It has a lot of great information on this topic, including the Do Not Call registry and some risk factors. It has a checklist for families to scan-proof the house or the situation, and a resource list, a lot of which the resources that are on this slide here are in that guide, and it's all free on protectseniors.com. And then again, that 4070talk.com, I mentioned that earlier, that's a great conversation starter for families to talk about not only senior fraud, but a lot of other great issues that are issues that are better to talk about before they occur rather than have reactive conversations after there's an emergency. So before we open it up to questions on this next slide, I want to give you a few steps, next steps that you can take as a professional when working with seniors. We've learned about the types of scams. We talked about why seniors are victims of scams, learned about the signs of abuse and some tips. But because it's likely that many of the families you work with are facing some challenges we've covered today, I want to kind of leave you with some food for thought. So what are the strategies that you can share with the people that you serve? What tips can you share with families? And as a professional, what are the things that you need to be looking out for when it comes to the topic of the scams and the crimes that are affecting seniors? So with that, I'm going to open it up to, or turn it back over to Steve to open it up for questions.
All right. Thank you very much, LAKELYN. Very informative presentation, as always. All right, everybody. It is time for the questions and answers portion of the webinar. So if you have any questions, just send them in there using the chat function, and we will get to them here. The first question here, LAKELYN, are you seeing any trends with Medicare or Medicaid frauds for seniors with random insurance changes without their knowledge?
That's a really great question. You know, Medicare fraud is something that I think is growing in popularity just because, you know, every senior over the age of 65 is more than likely going to be on Medicare. So on that Senior Medicare Patrol website, the resource is smtresource.org. I would suggest that you go to that website to see the more specific trends that they're seeing in Medicaid fraud, especially in terms of the changes in insurance. So I can't speak specifically to that, but I know that that Senior Medicare Patrol website is a great resource, as well as the Protect Seniors from Fraud protection kit on the website that I talked about earlier.
Also, this is Erin from Home Instead as well, chiming in. Hi, guys. The thing with the Medicare and the Medicaid scams, too, often gets ignored because it's misuse of a medical card. So the scammers will fabricate the treatment and then they get paid for it. So another strategy involves like finding a senior in need of medical supplies, and then they'll call him or her and say, hey, give us your Medicare card number and we'll send your supplies through the mail. So they can obtain treatments or medication by just assuming that other person's older adult identity.
All right. Okay, next question here is, here's a situation for you here. What if you have a senior who is being scammed by an internet romance and they really believe this to be true, and they're actively continuing to send the scammer money? What can you do to protect this individual?
That's a very sad situation, and unfortunately, I think it's occurring more and more. If you are in this type of situation, this is an opportunity to get the family involved. I think sometimes the senior can be blinded by love, as many of us can be. So if they can in any way get the senior to realize that the money that they're sending is maybe draining their own financial resources, is hurting them, and as a result, their income is being limited. Maybe you can approach it from almost protecting the senior in that aspect. Erin, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I also think, you know, getting a third party involved, because they may have reasons on, well, you just don't want me to be with, it might be too much of a personal conversation to have with a parent about a love interest. So I almost wonder too, like, to get a third party involved and just, you know, hey, let's look into this. Let's just verify that everything is correct. And then, sadly, when the truth comes out and it is identified that it's fraud or whatever, it kind of takes that family member out of the middle of it, and that third party is kind of the one to pull the blinders off, if you will.
That's a great suggestion, Erin.
Okay. What about a situation where you do not have a POA or any sort of authority over your loved one? How can you actually go in to speak to the bank if you suspect some sort of financial abuse?
Really good question. If there's no POA or a POA over the finances, the bank might be somewhat hesitant. However, if there's maybe cognitive impairment, getting the physician involved, maybe getting a letter from the physician saying that there is some sort of cognitive impairment, that might be a way that you can start the process of getting those POAs put into place. But I think that's why having those conversations early is so important. Making sure that there is a designated POA, there is people in place to help seniors make decisions before it's too late. Erin, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would also look toward the financial advisor and contacting their financial advisor, who could and may be named as somewhat of a POA if they don't have a family member named. So I would almost go to anyone outside of the bank that may be connected to the finances.
All right. You talked about this a little bit more, but maybe we could talk about it a little bit more in depth here. What about a situation where the financial scammer or abuser is a family member? What do you do in a particularly sticky situation like that?
That is probably, I would say, one of the most difficult situations of all. When it's your own family member that's exploiting the individual. If it gets to a point where adult protective services can be brought in, again, getting a third party involved can keep other family members out of it to hopefully avoid any family upset or bad ties between family members. But I think if you can get the senior to realize the abuse, and that can be very hard. Sometimes they can be blinded by it. Sometimes they can be afraid that if they reach out for help, that the family member might further exploit them, or there might be some additional abuse there. So if you can get, again, I know we keep saying that third party, but that is so important, I think, in a lot of these situations when there's family ties to the scam that's being involved.
And again, I think being proactive, like even ourselves, if we're in charge of someone's finances and they're a senior, I would want to protect myself from ever seeming to be involved in anything. So really taking yourself again and having that third-party barrier just for protection's sake, because I know with a lot of siblings, if one sibling is named in charge of the finances, the other ones may be like, well, I bet they're taking, it just negates the whole issue of family involvement and really brings that professional in. So while a financial advisor can handle those things, it really takes the family. So being proactive, I guess I'm saying, so it doesn't even get to the point of family creating that fraud is something we really suggest as well.
And along with that documentation piece, if there is family fraud currently happening, if you can collect information, if you can collect bank statements and collect evidence that the fraud is occurring, that might also help explain to the level, we really want to protect your assets. We want to make sure you're going to have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life, that you're going to have the resources that you work so hard for. So trying to get them to understand. And then, if it comes down to it, again, adult protective services or get legal counsel involved if need be.
Hey, we had some folks type in with some pretty good resources, so I just did want to pass those along really quick here. First one here, identitytheft.gov will help anyone who is a victim of identity theft. Again, that's identitytheft.gov. Pretty easy one to remember right there. Another tip here, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, which is FINRA, is a great resource. Put in a broker's name and they will tell you if there have been complaints filed, disciplinary action taken against this individual, et cetera. Again, that's Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, and you can go to brokercheck.finra.org. Again, that website for that one is brokercheck.finra.org, and FINRA is F-I-N-R-A, which stands for, of course, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. So just wanted to pass on a couple things about those.
Those are great resources. I always really like when people include resources, because I think this is such a broad topic that there are so many resources out there. It's hard to capture them all on one slide, and those websites are great. We know we talked a lot about making sure that you check into the individual to make sure that they're a legitimate person, because unfortunately even financial advisors and investors, they can be scammers, insurance agents. So you just want to do your due diligence, and those are great websites. Especially if they're government websites, they are legitimate ones that you can check to make sure that the individuals you're working with, the professionals that you choose to work with, are legitimate individuals. So great resources. Thank you so much, everyone.
Next question here for you. Do you have any tips on how to reduce incoming phone calls that are resulting in many small monthly charges for unnecessary products and services? Does it make sense to shut down the landline going with a cell phone only?
That's a good question. I mean, there's the do not call registries, which can prevent a good amount of telemarketing calls. Anymore, though, I mean, I'm getting a few calls on my cell phone, and I even have my cell phone registered on the do not call list. So if there is a family caregiver involved, if there's a way to maybe mute the phone so that the seniors can still make phone calls outside the home in case of an emergency, but they're kind of shut off from any incoming calls, that is an option. I know that there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of technology out there today to reduce the number of, or to have, a cell phone that also you can link to your home phone. You can Bluetooth to your home phone, so a senior still will feel like they still have a home phone, but they might, in reality, just have a cell phone that links to that by Bluetooth. There's also, if your senior loved one's getting a lot of solicitors to their front door, they have these little doorbells with a little video camera that can be set up on an app with a family member's phone. So if somebody rings the doorbell, it shows up on the loved one's app, and then they can see who's there, and they can respond and say, oh, I'm not feeling well, I don't want visitors, and then can avoid the senior from coming in contact with in-person solicitors too. So that is a great question. I say the do not call registry is probably your best bet, and then if you can reduce the number of phone calls coming into the home without totally cutting them off so they have access to emergency phone lines, that would be ideal.
Right. Well, LAKELYN and Erin, we have reached the end of our hour here, and we are unfortunately out of time for today's webinar, but I want to thank you for a fantastic presentation, so many good resources, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.